Hello, family. Peace be with you. Thanks for journeying with me on another Sunday in the Scriptures. Today's reading comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 20, verse 1 through 16. And as it reads, Jesus told his disciples this parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out at dawn to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with them for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. Going out about 9 o'clock, the landowner saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and he said to them, "You too go into my vineyard, and I will give you what is just." So they went off. And he went out again around noon, and around 3 o'clock, and did likewise. Going out about 5 o'clock, the landowner found others standing around and said to them, "Why do you stand here idle all day?" They answered, "Because no one has hired us." He said to them, "You too go into my vineyard." When it was evening, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Summon the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last and ending with the first." When those who had started about 5 o'clock came, each received the usual daily wage. So when the first came, they thought that they would receive more, but each of them also got the usual wage. And on receiving it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last ones worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who bore the day's burden in the heat." He said to one of them in reply, "My friend, I'm not cheating you. Did you not agree with me for the usual daily wage? Take what is yours and go. What if I wish to give this last one the same as you? Or am I not free to do what I wish with my own money? Are you envious because I am generous? Thus, the last will be first, and the first will be last." The gospel of the Lord. So not a terribly difficult parable to understand kind of what's going on and to follow along, but man, really powerful in its application. So let's see what we can pull out of it for our own experience and our own growth towards the kingdom, in the kingdom. So again, this is Jesus speaking in parables. He lived in an agricultural society, so he typically kind of gave examples of what the kingdom is like in comparing it to something as simple as agriculture in everyday life, something that they could relate to. So the characters in this parable, you have the landowner, which is God, and you have the laborers, who are essentially us. And we see that this landowner has this vineyard, and he needed some workers in the vineyard. So he goes to the city market, the city square, where day laborers would hang out in hopes that somebody like the landowner would need some help. And he would pick them up and take them to his land, and they would work. And he says that they agreed to the normal daily wage, which was a denarius at the time. So he does this, and in this parable, we can gauge that it's basically a 12-hour workday, so sun up to sundown. So at sun up, at 6 a.m., he goes and he gets some workers and agrees to pay them the usual daily wage, a denarius. And then the landowner, for whatever reason, we don't know, he goes back at 9, then he goes back at noon, then he goes back at 3, and he finally goes back at 5, knowing that the day comes to an end at 6, at sundown. So this is where the parable gets interesting, because this would have been a little twist to the people who are like, well, why didn't the landowner just get the people in the beginning? So this is where Jesus really wants to make his point. And as we go on and learn that the first people, when the foreman calls to receive, he's going to pay the people that came last first. So he gives them a denarius. So then you figure the people that have been working all day are like, oh man, I should receive 10 or 12 denariuses, which is a day's work. So I'm going to hit the jackpot today. This is going to be amazing. But then when the foreman starts paying out, he starts paying the people that came at 5 and only worked 1 hour, gives them a denarius. People that came at 3, came at noon, came at 9, gives them all the same. Even to the people that came early in the morning and worked in that hot heat all day, he gives them the same. And then the people that work 12-hour shift in the heat complain, and they grumble, and they say, after receiving it, they grumbled against the landowner, saying, "These last ones only work 1 hour, and you've made them equal to us, and we bore the day's burden in the heat." And the landowner reminds them that they're not being cheated. Hey, this is what we agreed to. I'm giving you a fair day's wage. And he says, Am I not free to do what I wish with my own money? And here's the key that we want to focus on. God, the landowner, says, are you envious because I am generous? You see, they mistook the parable. They mistook and saw this as a divine injustice rather than God's divine generosity. Right? And I think this parable, we can look at it from a few different ways, and I don't think you'd be wrong in looking at it from several different angles. But maybe Jesus, written in the Gospel of Matthew, typically to Jews, the vineyard was kind of this, kind of represented the kingdom back in Israel, so they would have been familiar with this parable of the vineyard. And how, think of it like this, the people that come at 6 a.m. and work all day, that's Israel. That represents the prophets and the patriarchs and God's firstborn son who he set free from Egypt, and the father of faith, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and the 12 tribes, and Moses and the Davidic kingdom with King David and Solomon and the temple and the worship and the promises. All of that to Israel who have slaved in the vineyard, working and going through the hardness of life with the Father. And then you have the Gentiles, the Johnny-come-latelys, who come at 5 p.m. right before closing hour and basically just help clean up. And they receive the same offer of salvation as the Gentiles, who had for generations been there all along. And now the Gentiles are just now going to be welcomed into the kingdom in the Messianic age through Jesus. And they both receive the same. But we can also see this through the light of maybe individual salvation, where I think of somebody like St. Lucia, who in 1917 was a visionary of Mother Mary in the miracle of Fatima, in the apparition of Fatima, who I believe she was 9 years old at that time, was one of the visionaries for 6 times where Mary appeared to Lucia, Francesco, and Jacinta about 100 years ago. And from that time on, she dedicated herself to the vineyard, to working in the Lord's vineyard, to dedicated herself to a life of prayer and fasting, and she entered the convent and lived well into her 90s. So for 80 plus years, she served the Lord. She was there at 6 a.m. and went all day for the Lord. And then you have others like the thief on the cross, who lived a life far from God, and he admittedly deserved to be on that cross next to Jesus. But he repents at the last moment, and Jesus says, today you will be with me in paradise. They receive just Saint Lucia and the thief on the cross, Didymus, through tradition we call him, received the same gift of salvation. Although one worked a lot longer in the vineyard than the other, it's the same gift, right? So this isn't about a divine injustice, but about a divine generosity. And those early workers were envious, right? God, the landowner senses this. Are you envious because I am generous? Because I gave the thief on the cross the same salvation as Lucia? I'm giving the Gentiles the same offer of salvation as the Israelites? Are you envious because I am generous? And they were ungrateful. They were grumbling even though they received what they had agreed. And envy is simply the sin of being upset over another's good fortune, right? And think about that. Being upset because someone else has received something and we haven't, right? And there's no place for that in the kingdom. There's no place for that in a disciple's heart. And if that's a place we're at, we need to ask the Lord to help us, help remove that from us, and take that to prayer and to the Lord and let the Lord heal us, because envy steals our peace. It steals our joy. It makes us ungrateful. And it's not a place that we want to live from. We want to live from a place of gratitude and thanksgiving and content in all circumstances. And we don't want to live from this place of, God, you owe me, because the truth is God owes us nothing. God he didn't owe those workers that denarius that only worked, 1 hour and 6 hours, 3 hours, whatever it was. They didn't deserve it. They didn't earn it. God was generous and gave it. And everything we have is a gift from God, plain and simple. Everything we have is on loan to us. And that's why we are stewards. We are not owners solely. We are stewards of what God has given us, especially of our time. God has given us our time. God has blessed us with talent. How are we using the gifts God has given us? God has blessed us with treasure, time, talent, and treasure. God, everything we have, God has given us. How are we using that gift that God has given us? Because he doesn't owe it to us. He's freely given us, and all we have to do is receive this gift and use it wisely. So we can actually put this in today's terms, because how many of us, think, well, I've been praying for a better job and I can't find one, and this person just seems to always get the promotion. Or I've been praying for health and this person doesn't even believe in God and gets healed by a doctor or whatever. Right? We can become envious for what is happening to other people. And this can slowly kind of creep in where we have this anger, this discontentment. We're envious, we're ungrateful. We see this as injustice rather than focusing on what God has given us and being grateful for that. We have to remember that our Father loves us. He wills our good always. He can't help himself but to love us as a father and a mother love their children and always desire what's best for their children. So if we haven't received something, maybe it's because it's actually not good for us. Right? I love this quote from John Newton, who wrote Amazing Grace. He says, "All shall work together for good. Everything is needful that he sends. Nothing can be needful that he withholds." In other words, he's saying that if we haven't received something, we don't need it. But if we do need something for our salvation, to become a saint, to become holy as God is calling us to be, then he will give it. And I love a couple quotes from some saints here. Saint Gianna Molla says, "The secret of happiness is to live moment by moment and to thank God for all that he, in his goodness, sends to us day after day." Take that to prayer. The secret of happiness is just to live in the present moment, to thank God for all that he in his goodness sends us day after day. St. Faustina says, "Go through life like a little child, always trusting, always full of simplicity and humility, content with everything, happy in every circumstance." Content with whatever we have, knowing that it's enough, knowing that our Father loves us and he wills our good always, happy in every circumstance, trusting that all things work together for good, that every hair on our head is numbered and nothing happens to us apart from our Father. And it reminds me, both of these reminds me of what St. Paul said in 1 Thessalonians 5, where he says, "Brothers and sisters, rejoice always, pray unceasingly, and in all circumstances give thanks. For this is the will of God for you in Christ Jesus." Brothers and sisters, the Lord is beyond generous to all of us. So let us be grateful for what we have received, not be envious of others, but be content in where we are and what we have received from the Lord and his promise for us moving forward. For he never promised us, all these things, but he promised us that he would always be with us. Let his presence be enough. May God bless you. Please pray for me as I pray for you.